last. I know that we ran out of time last time, so if you have any questions or feedback regarding the presentations that we had around safety trainings and fire risk reduction, please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Long. And yes, I think Brooke was also offering to coordinate if we wanted to do a board meetup at the salmon celebration. So toward the end of the meeting, we'll have a little bit of, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to coordinate that if folks are interested in meeting up there. So thank you. Any questions for Adina? Any remaining questions related to the fire safety presentation we had last month that we ran out of time for questions on? Okay. Terrific. Okay, with that, we'll move into the working group reports. Erin, you want to tell us what happened at community engagement?
Yeah, sure. So I don't have a whole lot to report. We started by just getting a little bit more background around Columbia Pools, since at the prior board meeting we had a public comment about that, and it involved community engagement. So we had a little conversation around that. And then we continued to talk about what the focus of the group should be and how the group can exist to best support Tim and Kenya. Tim, Kenya, and I have a meeting in advance of our next working group to kind of narrow in on some of what that work will be. It's still, as the group gets going, the meetings are an hour, and so we're accomplishing things somewhat slowly, but we're doing some of the getting to know you and getting to know the process work that needs to happen to be an effective working group. So I'm excited to continue that and to see how the group can kind of hone in on being able to support the work of parks. So that's really my working group report, and I'm happy if anyone from the group has anything they want to add. I'll be frank, I'm not a great note taker when I'm leading a meeting, so I undoubtedly probably forgot something important. So Tim, Kenya, or anybody else in the working group, if you have something you want to add, feel free.
It was a wide-ranging conversation, but I think you got kind of the character of it. So I think that's a great report. Thanks, Erin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. Anything anyone from the community engagement working group wants to add? Okay. If not, we'll move on to financial sustainability and Mike's report.
Thanks, Bonnie. So Dina already covered the fall bumps, so I think we've got a good update on that. A quick note on staffing. Jason Smith's moving out of his role as the manager of financial planning and analysis team. Our working group has worked with Jason pretty closely the last couple of years. Claudio's in the process of recruiting for a replacement. He's looking for someone that's an experienced manager, but is also experienced in building out financial functions and growing organizations. I think Erin, I think you're on the panel for to help screen applicants. The position's open for recruitment through Monday, so if you know anybody, if anybody on the board knows someone that might be a good fit for that role, just reach out to Claudio. Claudio, I don't know if you have a job description or a posting you want to throw a link to in the chat.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and put a link in the chat. Thanks, Mike.
Sure. And then finally, I mentioned a couple of months ago that our working group was asking park staff about exploring some federal grant opportunities through the EDA American Rescue Plan. Just as a little background, the EDA plan is going to invest about $3 billion nationwide as part of President Biden's American Rescue Plan in response to COVID. Originally, I think Claudio's team was hopeful that exploring and pursuing these opportunities would be coordinated citywide with a citywide approach like what took place with CARES funding last year. But it looks like that's not going to be the case. So, so park staff is exploring this with the limited available resources that they have. There's several programs included in the plan. And in our working group meeting yesterday, Lauren McGuire gave us a status update on the work that her team's doing to explore these potential grant opportunities. The opportunities for parks, the ones that they might be able to secure funding for, exist within a program that's focused on revitalizing outdoor recreation projects. It's estimated there's going to be about 150 projects that are going to be funded nationwide, primarily in the $500,000 to $10 million range, but it's possible that some could be funded at even higher levels. So Lauren and her team are developing a decision matrix to help in determining which potential projects that they already have on their docket might make the most sense to pursue for some grant funding. It's a pretty laborious process, and there's a number of decision criteria that are outlined by the EDA. And I won't go through those because there's a lot of them. Some possible projects that could be funded include a powwow arbor at Delta Park to host Indigenous community events, rebuilding O'Brien Square, designing and building sections of the Green Loop. These are just a few of the samples that are being explored. So applications are due by January 31st next year, or early application is also being encouraged. So Lauren and her team are going to be pretty busy with this over the fall. And we'll report back on the progress as we hear more. And that's pretty much what I have. I don't know if anybody else in the group has anything else they want to add.
Thank you, Mike. No other comments from those on the working group? Or Claudia, did you have anything you wanted to add to Mike's report?
Nope, you got it all. Thanks, Mike.
Terrific. Thank you, Mike. So with that, we'll turn it over to Patty to hear about the Land Use and Infrastructure Working Group.
Thank you, Bonnie. Well, once again, we had a pretty busy meeting, a lot of subjects. The first one we tackled was Cathedral Park DEQ testing. This is a long-running problem of ground contamination around the Peninsula Ironworks. And the complication is that Parks acquired some of that land years ago. So the question is Parks liable in some way for the cleanup? And so far, the indication is that they're not liable, but that's something we continue to follow. The second thing was that Holman Dock, which broke loose last winter and floated on down the river. So it needs to be returned to its concrete moorings and extended. Prosper Portland has been handling contractor quotes for doing that. The quotes they've got have come in high. It's now through the initiative of Portland Parks and Recreation, there is another approach which is less expensive, which is being looked at. So we're waiting to see where that comes out. The third topic was the Interstate Firehouse Community Center, which, as many of you know, has been used as a theater for some years now. There is a request for proposals out for an evaluation of this structure and how well it can fulfill its particular role. I think that there were a number of concerns raised by our working group. One was this is an unreinforced masonry building, and so preparing it for a safe future is obviously going to be an expensive thing to do. There have been a number of different theatre groups who've worked there, all have struggled. And I think a large part of the current RFP is it possible to survive there? Another question raised was that immediately behind it is a water tower, which apparently is no longer important to the system. Its only function at the moment seems to be holding up cell relay stations, cell phone relay stations. The question was raised, why are we not looking at housing in this area? It's right next to a little park. It's an area which is clearly needing more housing. So why is that not happening? So more questions than answers on the Interstate Fire Center, but I guess the next step is to see what comes in the way of proposals. The next topic was the Columbia Pool update. We've heard a little about that. There was a letter from friends. One of the questions which we've raised in the past is, instead of looking at Columbia Pool and its problems in one corner and a new pool at Jordan Center or wherever in the other? Why are we not coordinating this and coming up with a comprehensive plan which looks at provision for aquatic facilities citywide and just try and coordinate all of this? A further complication is there are railway tunnels in the vicinity of the Jordan Center, and the fear is that the vibration of construction and so forth might cause damage in those tunnels. So it raises a question as to, can we in fact build a new pool in that location? So more questions than answers, I'm afraid, there. The next thing we discussed was the replacement of the Burnside Bridge. As you know, it's the existing bridge will not be stable in an earthquake. Burnside is the main, you could argue, the main east-west link in the city. So the intention is to replace it with a bridge that is earthquake-proof. Randy Gregg and I are both on the advisory committee there. And we've been, I think, more than a little concerned by the fact that although we're not yet into design, a lot of decision-making is being driven by cutting cost. We agree that we want an economical solution, but a bridge that's going to be there for a century or more at the very center of our community must be properly designed. We can't just take the cheap option for that. So there's still a great deal of discussion around that. The bridge type selection is due now early next year. The process has become very slow indeed. And I think it's going to be the end of 22 before we really know what that bridge is going to look like. The last topic that we discussed in any to any extent was the Albino Vision project and its connection to the covers on the freeway at I-5, which have now, I think, been resolved. There's agreement as to how it should be done, except the price tag has gone from 795 million to 1.4 billion. And the question still hangs in the air. Is this really justified by the, as a safety measure, since there have been little other than fender benders on that stretch of freeway? So we also have a whole list of other categories that we keep an eye on, but that is what we covered this time. Do any of the working group members have anything to add to that? Then that's our report, Bonnie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patty. Wanted to just make sure there was no additions from anybody on the working group. Wanted to be heard.
I have a question about IFCC. I'm not on the working group though. I guess I'm wondering, so I actually used to go to board meetings at IFCC for Rock and Roll Camp for Girls maybe 10 years ago or so when the IFCC was run by Ethos. So I guess I'm wondering, with the process that's going on, I mean, there were a lot of issues with the space that they had then, and I'm imagining that it's not, a lot of that has been resolved. I guess is there going to be money invested in IFCC to actually, I mean, besides you have the issue like earthquake proof or whatnot, the space itself, if you want to have an actual like usable space that the people that are having it are going to be like, oh, they're appreciated, you know, there's something actually nice about using it. I mean, the building itself and the location is really great, but not the interior, you know, there's a lot of issues there. So I guess I'm curious about the whole process there. Is there going to be money invested in IFCC?
Well, my understanding is that the first question is it in fact viable to continue that use? The audience is pretty small, so unless you charge exorbitant price for tickets, it's very difficult to make the thing work financially. So I think that's the first question to be resolved. So we know how the building will be used. Will it continue to be used for a theatre, or will there be some other use? And if so, what kind of refurbishment would be appropriate? So my understanding is that it's a step-by-step process, and we're just not there yet, Aaron.
Okay, thank you.
One other thing that's sort of a crossover between the IFCC and the I-5 Rose Quarter project. The Albino neighborhood or Albino Coalition is interested in potentially a cultural center there. So it wouldn't have the earthquake issue and it wouldn't have the 99 seat limitation issue potentially. So it seems like that's something that we'd like to have the feasibility study take a look at. Is there a better location for a cultural center than IFCC?
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Paul. So my understanding, and staff might need to correct me on this, is that since this is out for RFP right now, the scope of work has already been defined on it. And I guess, one concern was, we wanted to be involved in this process before it went out for RFP. That didn't happen, but it came to us after we said, we think this is a relevant issue for the board to be involved in. At this point, I don't know where it is. I do know that, well, it's out for bid. I don't recall what the submission deadline is on it, or if there will be ability to revise the scope of work at that time. Maybe staff can fill us in on that, because I agree that, the broader issue of a relevant cultural center providing these services is important, and one perhaps without the unreinforced masonry restrictions that this current structure has.
I believe Lauren is on the call, and I will ask her to respond to that question.
So a couple, Bonnie. Yes, it's out right now for request for proposal, and it's a nationwide search for proposals. The scope of work for the feasibility study was reviewed by the panel that the community group that is involved in the process. And because it's out for RFP right now and not quite closed yet, we can't really talk about it, like the extent of what's involved in it. I mean, it's online, so you can look at it, but we have to be careful about how we communicate about it during the period when it's out for proposals. So happy to come back and talk more about it. We do not have any funding identified for what would happen, and we haven't really identified whether the building would stay or go, whether there'd be housing or a new building, or, that's kind of what the feasibility study is supposed to do, right? It's supposed to tell us, could it be viable in its current condition? If it can't be viable in its current condition, what should it look like? Does that helpful?
There was one other point that was raised, and that was that if the Parks Board is going to act on something, it needs to act before the RFP goes out, because as Lauren said, once the RFP is out, there's a limit on what information can be communicated. So there was some concern expressed that we didn't hear about this until after the RFP had gone out. So that, I think, is just a footnote for staff when we're discussing topics to come up. Try and get them to them sooner rather than later.
Thank you for that added discussion there. Anything else on land use and infrastructure? Okay, if not, we'll move into the Board Affairs Working Group. Casey.
Thank you, Bonnie. The inaugural meeting of the Board Affairs Working Group occurred, and I wanted to thank Ali and Corbin, Ilana, Nova, Aaron, Bonnie, and Brooke for all attending. Appreciate their time and their insight. Very productive. We agreed on a name, which is the Board Affairs Working Group. We agreed on the charge, which I think Bonnie has agreed to as well. We agreed on the meeting time, which is the last Wednesday of every month at 4 o'clock, and everyone is certainly encouraged to attend. And now we're working up the priority of issues in terms of what we're going to look at and in hopefully what order. They include special issues, issues related to board membership, reoccurring and ongoing issues, and reoccurring issues reviewed on an annual basis. Regarding special issues, I think the first thing, although this needs to be discussed at the next meeting, will be an update on board public comment procedure, which we are going to discuss with the Community Development Working Group, Aaron's group. Also in special issues are updating the board mission, process for board or board members to comment on programs and policies, the most effective use of board members in helping parks and park staff, and improving relationship among board members and between board members and parks leadership. Among the issues related to new board membership, which will work in connection or in collaboration with the ad hoc nominating committee, would be reviewed board membership procedure, update board matrix, and review the onboarding process. And then reoccurring and ongoing issues include determine possible non-board committee for board members to attend that would be helpful for board service. Develop, maintain the board calendar, and maintain the board roster. And then the reoccurring issues are those things that only a lawyer would love, such as updating the bio book for board members, review the board website, review the board bylaws and group working charges, and ensure compliance by the board and the working groups to applicable law. Certainly open to other issues that anyone might have, and I'm looking forward to getting a lot done. Any other person who attended the meeting have any other comment? Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. Any comments from anybody from the group or any questions from the floor? Okay. If not, we'll move into the report on the Parks Levy Oversight Committee. Paul.
Thanks, Bonnie. So the Parks Levy Oversight Committee, or PLOC, met September 27th, was our second meeting. And the committee is 5 people. It's Alicia Blakely, Judy Bluehorse Skelton, Maria Velez, Silas Sanderson, and myself. And our staff support comes from Melissa Arnold and Claire Flynn, and also Todd, of course, Claudio, and Sarah Huggins participate regularly. So we covered 4 major areas in the last meeting, and those were charter and bylaws adoption, a budget update, the council fall BMP letter, and then we started but didn't complete a topic preference ranking exercise. So just as in terms of a review of the PLOC, in terms of purpose, reviewing information for general compliance, receiving and reviewing financial audit information, and then producing an annual report similar to the board report to council. And we decided to move ahead to operate without a chair. So we're just going to be sort of free form that way. And we allowed ourselves the option of revisiting that if we felt like having more structure would be helpful to the functioning of the oversight committee. And we determined that we would meet quarterly rather than periodically as the charter initially indicated. In terms of the budget update and discussion, Claudio gave a very thorough overview of where we're at in terms of the $45 million a year that's coming from the levy and where that money's going in terms of the fiscal years ahead, and had a nice breakdown in terms of where that money's going. And then Todd described the pilot decision tool that Parks is developing, and the elements of that are identifying geographical areas within the city where potential investments would occur and scoring higher for areas having the highest number of people of color, youth, and households earning low incomes. And then detailed information about proposals through the racial equity lens to evaluate those proposals. And then Todd continued with a description of how the levy will impact the different divisions within parks. And so I'll just briefly give you an overview of that. So the land stewardship division currently has 151 full-time employees. The levy is going to allow for 41.5 new positions, and that's going to increase the capacity for daily maintenance, which will improve sort of the sense of safety and just sort of the cleanliness of our parks. I think it's really important in terms of perceptions by the public. Urban forestry is currently funded for 53 full-time positions, and the levy will allow 23 new positions to be added to urban forestry. Assets and development, 97 people currently, and 20 positions will be added as a result of the levy. Recreation has 227 employees or full-time equivalent, and I'm sorry, 286 FTE. And then the big thing here is going to be reducing the barriers to participation based on cost. There's $10 million available as scholarships. So that's a really nice step forward in terms of improving access to the programs offered by parks. And talked about equity inclusion team has 7 full-time positions, and there's going to be 2 new positions added as a result of the levy. And operations and strategies has 116 with 30 full-time rangers. And the levy will add 2 permanent ranger positions, which will be a nice improvement there. And in terms of how the levy responds to the ballot measure, these numbers don't add up to 100% because of overlap in different areas. But 78% of the budget will contribute to protecting and growing nature. 42% will support recreation for all, and then 28% will support elements of community partnerships. And we drafted a letter to City Council for supporting the proposed fall bump, and that went forward very straightforwardly. And we're going to receive a questionnaire to work on preferences going forward. Are there any questions?
I just want to clarify the E&I team has 3 full-time positions and we're adding 4.
Thank you, Kenya.
Okay.
Paul, I also just wanted to, it's Lauren, I just wanted to clarify that the Asset and Development Division has 20 new positions, of which 4 of them are apprenticeships opportunities.
Thank you.
I see
Casey.
Casey's has
Thanks.
hand up.
Yeah, Paul, I just had a quick question. Is the committee accepting input from outside sources other than within parks? In other words, are you picking up any type of testimony or preferences from or opinions from any of the outside citizen groups?
It's open. We did have 1 citizen member attend last time, or member of the public attend. So yes, it's an open committee, so people can attend. So far, we haven't received a lot of input, though. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions for Paul? Can I ask an add-on question to Casey's question? So your meetings are open to the public, and you mentioned that no other folks are coming in to participate in the meetings, but is there any attempt to reach out to those who may not be able or know to attend this meeting, quarterly meeting?
There's no set outreach program that I'm aware of at this point. So that would be a question for Melissa and for Claire, to how do we want to sort of make more people aware of what we're doing and invite them to participate? But yeah, I think at this point, we're still in the early stages of kind of getting our charter set and a lot of sort of organizational work that wouldn't be terribly engaging for the greater
Right.
public.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Looks like Adrian has her hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question. It's probably a detail that needs to be taken up at another time, but I was wondering how the scholarships are gonna work. The concern being that often we create these administrative processes by their definition are exclusionary. I watched with our pools when there was limited access and how you had to time being online at exactly the right moment, to get into a class, that type of thing. So anyway, I think, it's going to be an interesting challenge of how to make the scholarships really inclusive.
That's a great observation, and I'm going to deflect that right over to Maximo because he can answer that way better than I could.
Sure, great question. So we're currently piloting a variety of initiatives right now. They also include a pay what you can model to kind of be able to provide a sliding scale for being able to adjust cost of activities based on patrons' identified ability to be able to pay. We've piloted that initially for our summer programs and are continuing that into the fall program. We're also exploring a discount pass opportunity. That is something that we're also piloting for this coming fall. And so that is able to kind of apply discounts to established accounts for those that are looking to apply for or to register for programs. And so we're currently piloting those couple different models, trying to see which ones kind of are the most effective and are kind of get the results that are needed from those, particularly from the public. And so we're currently exploring those, kind of trying those out, and we're kind of trying that out right now, as we know, in the time of COVID, where we've got limited program offerings at the moment as a result of COVID, and as we continue to track the Delta variants. And so this is for our registered programs, and trying to think that as we continue to look at it, we're looking really at full scope, knowing that registered programs are a select portion of the activities we offer, and also know that we've got a variety of drop-in options as well, that we want to make sure that can be available and affordable to those that are interested, depending on the activities that they might be interested in participating in. So we are currently exploring those options and the opportunities that those can create right now, and hope to have more to report out on soon.
Yeah, it sounds great. Thank you. Just one quick comment, and that is I'd love to see the parks work on ways to establish new patrons, not just sort of for people who show up, have the focus be on that. How do we get to at-risk folks that are not coming in? So.
Correct. Yeah, and we have a variety. We're also kind of exploring internally kind of our marketing and outreach opportunities that we have available. Again, knowing that we're currently operating within COVID right now, but that we've particularly for this past summer, we really connected a lot with our community partners that we worked with, particularly those that engage with the prioritized communities that we're looking to engage with as a conduit to be able to kind of communicate, invite, and welcome people in, and we'll continue to do that as well, coming in to expand that going forward.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks, Adrian, for your question, and thanks, Maximo, for clarifying. Any other questions for Paul on the Oversight Committee? Okay, with that, we'll move into the Foundation report. Hey, Randy.
Greetings. Sorry I was late. I got tied up. Let's see. So the big thing that is coming up for us is our Friends and Allies Summit. As most of you know, we do these twice a year. The spring tends to be a little more celebratory and inspirational, and the fall tends to be more of a working session. So it begins October 22nd with a day of service in Woodlawn Park Nature Patch, and that'll happen from 9 to 12. And I'll put a registration link in the chat in a minute. And then on Saturday, the 23rd, there will be opportunities for a day of service at Columbia Children's Arboretum, Powers Marine Park, and Powell Butte Nature Park. So these are fun. We try to encourage people to work in parks that are not in their backyard, so they get to meet other folks, and they're there's a degree of curation involved just to try to get things kind of more mixed and help people meet other folks as they're working in parks. Then the program aspects of it will start on, and this will be virtual. We thought about trying to do something live, but our steering committee was really against that. So so we're going to do this one virtual and hope that we can meet together in the spring. But Monday, October 25th at 5 p.m. There will be a session on fiscal sponsorships, what they are and what they aren't. We have a couple of great legal experts looking at that. And it sounds kind of boring, but actually in the polling survey that we did in terms of what our friends and allies groups most wanted, fiscal sponsorships were way up there. And then the foundation's also sort of exploring possibilities for us to widen our program in that, because it really helps small organizations not have to do all the labor of being a standing nonprofit organization. We've helped a number of groups get on their feet that way, but there's other foundations in particular Seattle Parks Foundation that's really all they do is they help manage finances and fiscal sponsorships for groups. Then on Tuesday, October 26th will be our keynote, and it'll be Parks and Houselessness, Building Compassion and Equity Between All Portlanders, and it'll be with Commissioner Dan Ryan. And that should be a great session. We'll have a little preface to that, giving some kind of hard facts and stats about the city's program and managing the houseless situation in terms of how dealing with various camps and how the prioritization for dealing with those camps operates, which is some basic information that I think a lot of Portlanders don't necessarily have. And then Dan is quite articulate and has had some personal experience with houselessness and mental illness, and so it should be a really great session. I've heard him speak before about this, and it will be good. And I think it'll dispel a lot of myths around that have popped up around the issues of the city sanctioned areas and how they will interact with parks or not. Then Wednesday, building community engagement with an equity lens. This is, of course, a big topic with a lot of organizations, right now. And we'll be building this session around the work that Renee Myers at Forest Park Conservancy and Chad Brown have been doing. He's with Soul River, which is a really great outdoors group. And the collaborations that they have developed, and it should be a really great session for kind of learning on the ground how to build really successful partnerships with BIPOC organizations. And then the last session will be on Thursday, October 28th, investing in your volunteers. And many of the groups that we have in the Friends and Allies, over 200 organizations are really reliant on built upon volunteer service. So this is going to be a session on how you can retain and expand your volunteer groups. So very workaday session or week of sessions, and hopefully any of you are allied with groups, you might consider attending, and I'll put the registration in the chat. And other than that, we start some conversations with PPR, looking at the relationship between Ppr and Ppf. It's 20 years old. Many things have changed, ranging from the levy to how philanthropy operates these days. So we feel like it's a good time for kind of a reset and to really examine what we can do together moving forward. And that's my report. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Randy. Any questions for Randy? Comments on the Friends and Allies Summit? No, thank you. With that, I wanted to allow a little bit of space to talk about this issue of the public art that was raised. Unfortunately, I know two of the people who had sent messages and had strong opinions, Corbin, and it looks like Nova. I just missed Nova, I guess. But Patty, you had introduced this issue, but it also came up in a number of other contexts. And I know your opinion differs from that of Corbin and Nova, but do you want to provide your context for the rest of the board? And I don't think we can have a robust discussion at this point. We don't have time for it, but I would like to, my goal for introducing the topic and allowing space here is to have a plan for how we will address it, either through one of the existing working groups or through an ad hoc group, depending on the folks who are interested in working on it, what they feel is the best course of action. So with that, Patty, do you want to introduce briefly your perception?
Thank you, Bonnie. Yes. Briefly, the concern is that preemptively hauling down the statues in the South Park blocks really undermines the democratic process of doing things after broad public consultation and deciding on what we want to do. The objections I've heard have mostly revolved around, you have to recognize the context following the murder of George Floyd and so forth. You know, there's anger, justifiable anger, and that therefore toppling the statues was somehow allowable. I find this a very dangerous course of argument. It states basically that the end justifies the means, that what you want to achieve justifies whatever you do to get there. That is the rationale that has been used by terrorists throughout history. And it really is very worrying indeed. I recognize the political impossibility of restoring the statues, because anybody who does so will immediately be tagged as a reactionary racist by those who disagree. And that's a politically untenable position for anyone. So the fact is, it's unlikely that the statues will be returned to place. But somehow we have to get across that it is not acceptable to indulge in violence in order to get your point across. I mean, that's what's at the bottom of all of this. And that's why I think it's so important that we face it head on. If the statues were back in position, then we could have a completely unbiased discussion about what are the criteria that justify removal of pieces of public art that have been there for some time, and what are the criteria for new pieces. What things must they, what tests must they pass in order to be erected? So I think those are really the issues on the table, and it is a complicated issue, but one I think we have to address. I would also mention that when RAC recommended proceeding with replacement of the sculptures, they quoted the South Park's block master plan, and I think they interpreted a paragraph which is certainly not central to the report, but the justification was basically laid at the feet of Parks and Recreation, which is again a reason that makes it urgent for us to address. I think that's said enough about it, because I think you understand what the issues are. Thank you, Bonnie.
So with that, I think I would ask that, again, unfortunately, Corbin and Nova aren't available, but is there a working group that we think should take this on, or should we suggest the creation of an ad hoc working group? Because I do think that Nova and Corbin would be valuable voices in that. Also, Patty, I really appreciate your initiative in bringing this, and I do think it's an important issue for us to make space for, because you know, one of our key roles is to be a public forum for these types of issues. I'll say though, Patty, that, you know, those statutes were never part of any democratic process to begin with. I just want to point that out in terms of your summary there. It looks like I have two hands up, Casey and Adrian. Casey, go ahead.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, Patty. My question actually is to park leadership and as to whether they're doing anything regarding the statutes, either in response to what RAC is doing or decision or its process. I'm just curious to see if there is any active discussion or statement that's going to be made by Parks.
I will say that we made many statements as these statutes fell, and I think Tim can probably pull up at some point all of the correspondence and communication that we made when that happened, which was like a year and a half ago or whatever. And so it feels odd to be discussing that part now, because we actually were pretty vocal about the vandalism, right? And also about the almost sort of like the dichotomy, right, of vandalism and violence, and the fact that some of these statues represented values that perhaps Portland no longer held. We have been in contact with RAC regarding renaming, regarding criteria for placing new art in parks and other public spaces. It is something that falls within their portfolio. Parks can decline having art included in our parks. So I know that there's a lot of a process going on right now. I think it would be appropriate for an ad hoc group to form, but I do think that there's a lot of background information that the city and RAC are doing now that would be necessary to help inform whether or not there's even action to be taken right now. But I also know that RAC will be having a community engagement process around this. And so I think if the board is interested in engaging in whatever RAC is planning, that can certainly be arranged. I'm going to ask, maybe Mona has some more information, because RAC is under the commissioner's portfolio as well. So we sort of have an inside track if she's able to speak to it.
Thanks, Director Long. I just want to provide a little more context. I've been the arts liaison with Cynthia from the start, so I've been working on these issues. And the bit of information, so we did see that RAC recommendation that came from the board last week or the week before, which you all are aware of. We're still waiting on a second part of RAC's recommendation. The board is meeting again tomorrow. And from there, they're going to recommend to the city, based on their initial recommendations, what sort of public process they recommend. And then it's up to us as a city to determine the next step. So just want to share the value from our office really echoes everything we're hearing from you of community engagement is necessary. And there will definitely be a public process on this. And we are not, we're not outlining that yet because we're waiting to hear RAC's recommendation, and then we will develop a consensus plan with the other council offices on what that recommendation or what that public process will be. So that's about as much info as I have right now, but happy to answer any questions about that.
Thank you for the additional context, Director Long and Mona. I see Adrian, Patty, and then Paul's hands up.
Yeah, my question, I mean, the larger philosophical issues here are extremely interesting and super important, but we're not going to, really be able to discuss it or resolve them here today. I also had questions about kind of the locus of control and the relationship between RAC and Portland Parks and Rec, and who has control of what, and and so therefore, what is the most appropriate role for the Parks Board? So interested in just hearing a little more about that.
Thank you, Adrian. I think that might be something as we work through this. I'm not saying we can't answer that right now, but it sounds like it is one of those issues that needs to get worked through. So I'm not going to allow additional time for that particular discussion right now, because I do think it's one of those things that, as Mona was saying, maybe there's a role for an ad hoc group from this body to participate in that. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Patty and Paul to make their comments or questions quickly, and then maybe what we can do is ask for volunteers from this body to form an ad hoc group that will then work with Mona as they figure out what the best engagement process is within the commissioner's office, and have that group be a subset of this body. Patty, Paul.
Thank you, Bonnie. I just wanted to dispel one possible misunderstanding. Both Nova and Corbin commented that there had been no public process around erection of those statues in the first place. I would submit that that's not a relevant question, because our heritage, our entire heritage as a city, for the most part, was done without public process, at least 100 years ago. So that is not an issue. I think the issue is why were the statues erected, and they were really to recognize the achievements, the positive achievements of both presidents. That's why they're there. To say that there was no public process is not relevant. It is what it is. We accept what is there, or we reject it, and we can do either. But we have to do so from a point of neutrality, not having our arms twisted. That's all I wish to say.
Thank you, Patty. Go ahead, Paul.
Yes, just briefly acknowledging this is fraught. There's all sorts of fracture planes in this. And so one notion for addressing this, as opposed to the ad hoc committee, could be through the public engagement working group. And the reason I propose that is that obviously we've got this spectrum of the toppling of the statues, the recent popping up of skateboard parks, and pickleball carts, and then on the other end of the spectrum, we've got the statue, which was long overdue for York, which was then vandalized. Coming up with a policy that addresses all these sort of on a spectrum would be really helpful. And I think we could do it within an existing working group. So that's my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
Thanks for the suggestion, Paul. I'm not averse to that. I only suggested the ad hoc because it seemed like there was a pretty disparate group of people who seemed interested. Erin, as the chair of the Community Engagement Working Group, how about I give you some space to weigh in on Paul's suggestion?
Yeah, I'm not opposed to that. I think I'm still not clear in my head what the action item would be of taking it on as a board, but we could start those conversations, and then also our meeting's only an hour. So, I mean, I could sit here and talk about this for more than an hour. I'm sure most of us could, right? Yeah. So, but I can take that back, and at least, we could start it in that working group. I think that getting anywhere with it would be a longer, would require a lot of time and investment and learning about the background and the process. And then also, if we're coming to some kind of consensus on anything, might be difficult as well. So, but I do agree that it doesn't necessarily mean that we just don't talk about it. So we can start there, and I can report back on what the group thinks at our next meeting, at our next board meeting, if that makes sense. So, but maybe getting some of that background in advance would be helpful. So,
yeah, I think that's good. With that, I think, Patty, you are not a member of the Community Engagement Working Group, and I know that this is an issue that's important to you. It sounds like, Mona And then Adina's office, to some degree, can provide some of the background and context that would allow the working group just to get enough context to help be a productive member of the discussion. Does that sound like a reasonable way to approach this? I'm not looking for a vote. I'm just looking for consensus, unless somebody has strong opinions. Okay, thumbs up from Patty, thumbs up from David, Adrian, Paul. Okay, Casey, yep, okay. Alejandro, okay, I don't see any thumbs down at all. So let's go ahead and go with that as an approach. And like I said, I very much appreciate that Nova and Corbin at least are on the community engagement working group. So, because I know that they were interested and were unable to make it today. So, all right, thank you for that discussion, allowing us to take the time to come up with an approach for that. And Mona, if you can be in touch with Aaron, and then Aaron, I guess we'll have Brooke also coordinate with you for other contexts. That would be great. Thanks, folks. Okay, anything else on that topic before we move into the decision support tool? Right on time. No? Okay. With that, Carrie, we'd love to hear what you've got to say.
Thanks, Bonnie. Hi, Carrie.
Hey, Todd.
That's not Carrie, that's Todd.
It's Terry. Todd and Carrie.
Prefer Todd.
Brooke is going to share a slide deck. I'm going to do a little intro, and then Carrie's going to walk us through the details of the decision support tool pilot. And then we'll talk about some next steps and open up for discussion. I think we've got time for all of it. So thanks for having us this morning. Carrie Anderson is here today. She's one of our phenomenal performance management analysts at the Bureau, and she's done a lot of great work on this. So happy to be sharing this with you today with her. Also just wanted to send a shout out to Casey Mills. Thank you for working on our working group with this over the past months. It's been great to have you and great insights to help us do this pilot. And then also J.R. Lilly, who's Portland Parks Foundation board member, but also works on East Portland issues. He also participated on our working group for this project. So thanks to him as well. So we're going to jump in, just talk about some of the opportunities. If you could go to the next slide, Brooke, of what we saw in development of this tool. So as many of you know, this pilot is part of the Bureau's larger Healthy Parks and Healthy Portland planning framework. And that framework is replacing and consolidating lots of our plans into one place, including the Racial Equity Plan, the Bureau's Strategic Plan, and our Vision 2020 plan. And we saw an opportunity in this pilot to use performance and demographic data that the Bureau has previously collected to better inform our decision-making. In addition, we saw an opportunity to make sure that the decision-making process itself was transparent and identify trade-offs of different investment choices in a consistent way by having a common decision-making framework. Finally, with the Parks Levy, there was a specific need to track investments against levy commitments. You can go to the next slide. So throughout this presentation, you'll hear us refer to this as a pilot. And for us, calling it a pilot took a lot of the pressure off of our team members to allow us to recognize that this was a work in progress and giving us room to experiment, knowing that we could identify the strengths and weaknesses of the tool and use the learning to improve for the next one. And so that's the process we're in now. As a pilot, we limited its use to the fall bump proposal process and try to keep it simple, both in the number of items included and then how it was scored. And so Carrie will now share how we use the tool.
Thanks, Todd.
So I'm going to keep my camera off. My internet's being a little picky here this morning. But I know that we've kind of already given you some information about why we needed this tool and what we expected to get out of it. But before we get to the actual instrument, which I will show you, I just wanted to kind of quickly define what a decision support tool was, and then use the next few slides to explain how we got there. So essentially, a decision support tool is just a way to capture and analyze a large amount of data, and then we use it to either answer specific questions or help make specific decisions. It's a participatory process, so it's created by many people, as Todd mentioned. JR and Casey were amongst those, and it's customized to meet the needs of the organization. It can be simple or it can be complex as needed. There's lots of different models that can be used, but we're going to show you the one that we specifically chose. So you'll see on the right-hand side of this screen, this is a screenshot of the tool that I will be showing you. And it's basically a combination of fall bump proposal information, which we see on the left-hand side with all the numbers and a lot of text. And the decision support tool was integrated into it. And that's where you see the colorful bars. And so again, we'll actually pull up the tool and spend some time going through it. Next slide, please, Brooke. So what I think of this entire process, to me, it's kind of broken down into 4 major parts. And I'll just quickly define each of the steps in the process, and then we'll use the next coming slides to actually give you more detail about each of those steps. The first part was identifying our values. So this was just essentially making a list of what is important to the Bureau. And then once we had that list, we thought about how we could develop a scoring mechanism. So which is basically a way to quantify if a fall bump proposal was addressing the value that we wanted to score. Then we worked out the most technical piece, which was how do we capture and organize all of this data from multiple contributors, and how do we run it through this scoring process? And then finally, we built a Tableau dashboard, and we developed that to share the initial data of the proposals themselves and the decision support tool results with both decision managers and with division managers and decision makers. So each of these steps took a different amount of time, but I would say overall from our very first conversation about this process until the tool was actually being used probably took us about 4 months. Next slide, please. So our initial list of what we wanted to measure is on this slide. So all of these bullet points were things that we originally wanted to measure. And as you can see, most of this was largely based on past work from you all, from BAC, from the community input. And in true Parks manner, we wanted to measure it all, but we had some conversations. We decided to go back to that concept that this was a pilot and just start simpler. So the items listed at the top of the slide were tracked, but we didn't include those in the final scores. And then the items at the bottom, those 3 things listed there are had a formal scoring mechanism, and then they were aggregated to make a composite score for the final decision support tool. And so I'm just going to talk briefly about each of those 3 things that you see at the bottom of that slide. Next slide, please, Brooke. So we'll start with the map. Proposers were provided the map and the table that you see here, and they were asked to estimate the percentage of the investment that would be occurring in each part of the city. So we calculated the total score by multiplying that percentage they provided us by what we're calling a demographic score. And basically that's a score from 1 to 5, and it's based on the percent of individuals that are living in each of those districts with regards to people of color, youth, and households that are experiencing low income. So final scores could range anywhere from 3 to 15. Next slide, please. The second component that we scored came from our racial equity lens and empowerment tool. So proposers were provided each of these 7 steps, and they were asked to briefly describe how their fall bump proposals related to each of those steps. And then these responses were sent to a small group of independent reviewers, all from our bureau, who were all well-versed in equity. And they reviewed each of those steps and scored them on a scale from 0 to 3. And then the average for each step was added up. So a final score could range anywhere from 0 to 21. And just a quick aside to this, operationalizing this racial equity lens was also being piloted at the same time. So we were really fortunate, not only that the equity inclusion team had already created this really great tool, but that pairing it with the decision support tool allowed us to see how it worked in like a real life setting. Next slide, please. The final scores came from our division managers. So they were provided all of the proposals in advance, represented by the 42 blue squares on the left. And then they met as a group and they were asked to sort the proposals according to how much they advanced racial equity from lowest to highest. So the 42 proposals were assigned to one of those 4 groups ranging from 0 to 3 with the idea that roughly each group would have the same number of proposals. Next slide. So this is our kind of final scoring table, just summarizing what we went through. There were a total of 39 points for all three of these scores put together. They are all based around equity, and specifically 29 of the 39 points, so 74% are related to racial equity. So again, scores range from could range from 3 to 39. Our scores for the proposals went from 13 to 32, so a pretty good range. Okay, so now I'm going to ask if Brooke will stop sharing. I'll go ahead and share my screen and show you the tool itself. Can everyone see what's on the screen? Okay. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is kind of a dual purpose dashboard that I'm showing you. The first part has all of the information for the fall bump proposal, and then it was combined again with the scores that we just talked about from the decision support tool. So I'm actually going to show you 3 of the 4 little tabs here and just kind of walk through what we use them for and when we use them. So this was kind of our tool that we used during the initial proposal review. And this is where information provided by the proposer was combined with a line item budget data from the budget analysts. So you can see here at the top, we have some information about this proposal. And then once scores were available, the scores were also added at the top. But this is just general proposal information. And then as we work down through here, we can look at any of the narrative that was provided by the proposer. And we can look at any of the budget information that was built with the budget analyst and the proposer together. Each of the things that we've just talked about, the racial equity lens, the decision support tool, and the decision manager scoring is all available here, along with the narrative that was provided for the racial equity lens. And then, as we mentioned before, we have some things that weren't scored, but they were still tracked. So for example, levy outcomes and commitments. So each proposer had a list of the levy outcomes and commitments, and they told us what their primary, what their primary commitment was related to their proposal, and then any secondary commitments that they might also have. So this allowed for a really deep dive into an individual proposal itself. And then we tended to use this screen during the actual decision-making process. And so again, this is what you saw in that quick screenshot. This is both the financial information and the aggregated decision support tools. So we provided some functionality by first being able to say we could sort on info, or we could sort on demographic, or excuse me, we could sort on
Carrie, we lost your audio.
If I could just suggest maybe everyone turn their camera off, it might help Carrie with her data.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Okay, so yeah, I'll just kind of go back and just talk quickly about the functionality. So we have all of the proposals listed in the data in terms of the requests here available, and then there's the ability to sort by the different decision support tool components. So if you wanted to see what scored the lowest on the demographic service area score, you could do that. If you wanted to sort by total highest, you could do that. So having this functionality helped while we were working through the process of discussing the proposals. There's also some functionality in terms of getting rid of what I would call the noise. If we don't want to focus on everything, we have some filters here. So you were able to actually filter down by a specific division or a specific proposal. And then you could even say, only show me requests that are within a certain amount, or show me only demographic information that hit a certain level. So just having the functionality to filter and kind of make the decision, make the conversation more focused was also available. And then our third dashboard was used kind of during and after the decision-making process. So this was used to track and confirm final decisions in real time. So we were actually able to update this constantly while decision makers were making decisions. And it had several benefits to us. One was we were able to start seeing how much had been approved. We were able to use the proposal status on the right, and anything that hadn't been discussed yet was left blank, so we could see how much discussion was left. But this also served as a way to confirm that what we were recording was what the final decision makers had said they wanted. So we also use it as a quality assurance dashboard. So that's it for my portion of the presentation. I'll turn it back to Todd so we can talk a little bit about the lessons that we've learned.
Thanks, Carrie. And Brooke, if you could bring up the next slide in the deck, that would be great. And I'll just get started while you do that. So once the tool was piloted, we've had several meetings with those who participated in the process. These included the proposers themselves, the racial equity lens reviewers, the analysts who contributed budget data, and the decision makers in the process. All the participants voiced strong support for the process and the tool, and they're eager to improve it and continue its use in future versions of decision making. They also agreed that they were being asked to think about decision making in ways we hadn't done before at the Bureau. For example, proposers were asked to operationalize our racial equity tool, and that was new for us to do during a budget process, and because it's a new tool as well. Division managers were asked to become more intimately familiar with the work of other divisions, which, while helping us break down kind of our silos internally between different operational divisions, also was, you know, a new task or newer task for many of us, and also takes more time, of course, to both, you know, focus on your own division that you're responsible for, and then working across divisions as well. So we recognize these changes will take some time to become habit. And speaking of time, it's a factor we try to account for in this process. And next time, I think we'll also look at trying to extend the time for review and development as well. Many of our team members, as you know, are very busy. And so making sure we have enough time in the process to make sure that everyone contribute the information they have to offer. So we felt the challenge of meeting CBO's fall bump timelines was, you know, some pressure, but we're looking forward to trying this again in the upcoming budget process. One of the lessons learned was that this process highlighted that the shared values like safety, care, and even how we apply the racial equity lens was not always, we didn't always have a common definition amongst all of our staff. And that led to inconsistency between how people wanted to respond to the proposals development. And also it impacted the scoring of these values. So not having a specific framework with a shared understanding specifically around the values was a challenge. We'll be addressing this issue in the next iteration of the pilot. Brooke, if you go to the next slide, please. Thanks. Though we are done using this version of the tool for this pilot, we're not done. Our next step is to evaluate if the scoring process was as robust and representative as what we had hoped. Currently, we're developing our Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland infrastructure around actions and results. And that work will bring a performance management framework that will identify our workload, our performance, and how different aspects of how we improve our work at the Bureau. And that's something that we look at to possibly incorporate into the next iteration of the decision support tool pilot. So as I mentioned, we hope to pilot this again in the fiscal year 22-23 budget request that will be due in January. And we hope to apply the lessons learned from this iteration of the process. So we can stop sharing the slide here and open it up to questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Carrie. I see Mike's hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Bonnie. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Carrie. That was pretty cool. It's a slick tool. I really like this kind of stuff. One question I have is, I know, I understand that this is a tool that was just kind of meant to inform senior management for the recommendations that they would ultimately make for the fall bump proposals. And I'm wondering where there were, if there were significant areas of deviation where ultimately some recommendations were made that the tool might not have had as high up, or where you deviated from what the tool would have spoken to, and if there were any themes around that.
So that's
Allison.
Oh, sorry, that I'm working on actually right now. And I think one of the biggest things we see are there's just certain kind of high value proposals, like the need for workspace, like office space, and for our micro main computer, that there was a lot of money asked in that proposal, but folks, I think, struggle to, like it's not a demographic service area. They struggled about the racial equity lens component of it because it's more internal facing, so folks can do their work. So we did find places like that where it wasn't just a sense of like, well, if I had a high score, it's a go. And if it didn't have a high score, it's a no. So some of those are where we're seeing kind of inconsistencies, and just going back and doing the analysis and saying, okay, does that make sense? Does that make sense that those things were approved, but they had a low score? And where does it seem a little bit not as clear if something wasn't approved? And I think, Todd, do you want to kind of talk about the original gate or the budget guidance too? I think that's probably helpful context that folks went into this already kind of knowing what to focus on.
Sure. So for this past process, we had the levy commitments as kind of one of the guiding kind of guidance areas of where we knew we had levy commitments. We knew we had certain areas where we were deficient in services, for instance, daily maintenance and care of parks. We've been talking about this for a long time about we have less people taking care of developed parks today than we did 10 years ago. So that was one of the areas where there was some direction early on in the budget development process of saying that's an service area we know we want to include. So then how do you do that in an equitable way? How do you do that using the racial equity lens? That's, kind of how the process, I think, improved proposals. So examples like that, where we had some guidance up front, it wasn't just all ideas were equal from the beginning.
Thanks.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands up, but I do have a question or a comment, I guess. And I mentioned this in an earlier presentation of this tool. I also love data, and I think that it's important that we develop a system that not only reflects the values of the Bureau, but is also defensible and replicable. And my concern with the tool as it presently stands is that, two of the three main elements, the demographic element is empirical, but the senior management equity application, or whatever you're calling it, and then the other equity issue is very largely subjective about how those particular people doing the evaluation see the proposal as meeting those equity goals. So I would like to think that there would be a way to, I mean, not everything can be boiled down to numbers clearly, but I would hope that another rendition of this might be able to be a little bit more quantifiable in terms of how it goes about meeting those equity types of goals, rather than being reliant upon the particular people being utilized to score it. So that's just an observation that I have. I think it's a challenge because some of the goals are broad and there aren't necessarily easily quantifiable metrics for them. But I think there's a way to address it in the context of, either, again, using some of the demographic factors that are utilized in that first category, or in terms of outcomes, equity outcomes, that might make it an even stronger tool. So.
Yeah, I think we all wholeheartedly agree with what you just said. And I think we see the decision support tool as supporting the actions and results framework that we're just in the early stage of developing. And so we're hoping to have clearly defined actions with metrics that will be measuring those actions and then show how those actions contribute to community outcomes and impact. And so that's the work we're going to do together over the next coming year or so. So in the absence of that, I think you're right. It's like kind of the weakness of where we are in the development of the action and results framework. But I think that's the goal of that. We will have agreement with community, with Parks Board, with internal staff of what are the outcomes we're going after, why we're doing the work we're doing, and then how do we have, make the change through our actions and measure that. And all those measurements should be disaggregated by race, by income where we can, by geography. And so as we have those metrics, if you're a program designer within parks, you'll have kind of that suite already in front of you, and then you'll be trying to respond to that. This iteration, in absence of that, you had individual program managers kind of looking down at their own programming and try to create that kind of greenfield. And so I think you're right. That's kind of just where we are in the evolution of the work.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, and we spurred Adrienne to put her hand up again.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really a great addition to decision-making to, just put the equity front and center since it's been such a big problem. But, I also come from a kind of a quantitative background, and so, a couple thoughts came to mind, and one was some decisions obviously are not optional, things around, maybe safety or infrastructure that needs to be improved and that type of thing, or regulatory. So I think as the use of this goes forward, to start to understand what are the more optional types of funding categories and what's not, because it's be more useful for that. And then, the second part is, I didn't see, and I'm sure managers are considering this, is, in public health, we're saying, well, what problem is modifiable by a program? So in other words, the effectiveness of the program and the process versus just, the lens of who is it going to impact?
Thank you, Adrienne. Lorena.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just have a comment, and because great tool. Thanks for the presentation. And I think like just now familiar with it, was a great presentation, but I maybe on the just a comment, because maybe in the beginning on the projects will be like high for critical areas with that demand more equity actions, which is great. Like the tool will be it's a good way to identify those areas and to approve projects on the area. But one comment, it's that on a long term, maybe areas that have like a medium, like not too critical actable issues now might be like left behind. So like to maintain like not to de-invest from like medium areas that already have investments. Of course, like prioritize the highest points, like locations with more need, as the tool say. But my main question is that the tool be is the tool the only way to find those projects, or will there's a committee to okay, because if maybe like in the longer term will be like more projects in one area and due to the highest score. So just a comment about that. I don't know if I'm too clear. Sorry.
Todd, do you want to take a crack at that? Lorena, let me paraphrase what you're asking. It sounds like you want to make sure that the geographic consideration is a major consideration, and if there are other opportunities for other decision-making factors to come into play other than within the tool itself. My understanding is that part of the reason that they now call it the decision support tool is because they wanted to make it clear that it was a guiding tool and not its purpose was not to make the decision, but to help guide it. But maybe Todd can expand on that.
Yeah, that's right. And we just used it for the fall bump process, but kind of medium and longer term goals. We use it more for strategic decision-making, larger strategic decision-making. And I think it goes back to your other point, Bonnie, until we have a strategic framework in the Bureau to inform the decision support tool, like those two really need to go together. And there'll be a lot of factors, metrics, goals and outcomes in the action results framework that will kind of lead the decision support tool as well.
Okay. Thank you. Lorena, did that answer your question? Okay, other comments or questions for Todd and Carrie? Okay, if not, Brooke, we're getting back to the housekeeping side of things. Other issues that we have, for next month, we will get the workforce briefing from Margaret now that she's got the data from available to be analyzed on the summer hiring process and whatnot. But if there are other agenda items that you're interested in or any icebreaker ideas that you want us to try, please send them to me and Casey. And Brooke, I wanted to give you a little bit of time if folks wanted to do a board meetup at either the salmon celebration or what was the other thing? The foundation, Friends and Allies.
Arbor Day.
Arbor Day, yep. So maybe, and I know Brooke has offered to coordinate us on that.
Yeah, so Director Long shared some details about those events earlier in her report. So happy to help if folks want to coordinate something. I can assist in that if there's interest. So just let me know.
Yeah, maybe if there is a place or an opportunity that you might suggest that folks can meet up at the salmon celebration. I just don't know how that's set up. I haven't attended that in the past.
Yeah, if there's interest, I can work with Ken to get some information about a recommended meetup spot for folks and share that with you.
Okay. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order today? if not, I might be able to give you folks 5 minutes of your time back. All right. Well, thank you, folks. Thanks for letting us adjust the agenda and going with the flow there. Thank you, Community Engagement Working Group, for taking on the issue related to the statues. And we will see you next month. We're excited to hear the workforce update from Margaret. Thanks.